like all of the creative departments, locations is sent a script and may or may not be given a brief from production. And occasionally, with very forward-thinking productions, the art department might be on board as well, because it's a very important visual part of the storytelling. So talk us through, if you would, just the first, the kind of brief and what that might trigger for you.
Actually yesterday I came to the producers' talk, and it was quite interesting. Chris was sort of saying to Suzanne, who was the producer, that normally we sort of talk about 3 stages of production, which is pre-production, production and post-production. But he was saying actually in that, in a producer's world, there's 5, because before the pre-production, you've got the development, which is where the original idea comes from, and then afterwards you've got all the publicity. And there are times when actually I get involved in that sort of -1 stage, so that development stage. So there are occasions where someone will have an idea and they'll get in touch with me at a very early stage, not even necessarily with a script, but just say, look, this is kind of roughly what we're thinking of doing. Can you help us with some ideas or give us a bit of guidance? And at that stage, it really is just brainstorming. Once they get into actual kind of pre-production, so once the film or whatever it is has been actually kind of funded and greenlit and is going to happen, I will be usually sent a script, and depending on what it is, it's either a call with the director and sometimes director and production designer, but often sent quite a lot of visual reference, so photos, generally photos.
Sorry to interrupt you, would you say that they might start giving you parameters early on? So those parameters might be whether it's a period piece or whether we have to shoot in Slovenia because that's where we're getting the money from?
Yes.
Or can you say you can take this film anywhere in the entire world and choose a location for it?
I think that really varies on the job. So basically, I've been location managing for about 30 years, and when I very first started, I started off just working in TV commercials and the occasional pop video, and not that long into that, maybe 8 or 9 years into that, I had worked on a short film, but not as a location manager. And one of the commercials directors who I worked with, who was one of the biggest sort of commercials directors in the world, did stuff for Nike and Coke and that sort of thing. He self-funded with very, very, very deep pockets a film, which so he basically directed it, produced it, funded it himself, and it is a completely extraordinary film. So my first brief to the first film that I ever worked on was from the director, and he literally said these words, I want to shoot in the most amazing locations in the world.
Wow.
So it's the brief that most location managers think, you think that's the brief you might get at the end of your career when you've reached your peak, and probably you never do get, and I got it on the first ever job. So that came with almost no restrictions. He was really open to going anywhere, and he did that by being very clever and effectively tacking most of his film work onto the back of a commercial. So if he wanted to shoot in Namibia and a script came in, he would say, I think we need to shoot this TV commercial in Namibia. So he takes his crew out to Namibia and then at the end pays them for a few extra days, shoots part of his film and then comes back. So it really depends. But then now that I did that and then went back, just did commercials for a long time, and then only really got into doing film and TV more recently since I've been living here. And I think that it's really just really changes. Sometimes it's very, very specific, and sometimes it's much more open. So there's always budget considerations. There's considerations about logistics. There's often, even the budget comes out, there are often things like certain countries will offer big incentives for film crews to come. I've done a couple of scouts in Colombia recently, and if you tick the right boxes in Colombia, the Colombian government will give you 30% of your overall spend in Colombia back when you finish filming, because you're bringing in so much work to the country. So it's there's loads of different levels to it.
What would you say are the skills that you need, the technical, everyday skills that you need to do your job? What are how do you start? You've packed your bag, you've got waterproofs and a sun hat.
Yeah.
What else do you...
The location managing is quite an odd combination of skills. There are different location managers who tend to specialise in who are much stronger in certain areas. There's definitely a creative side to it. For me anyway, having a good eye feels like a very important part of the job, and understanding how a director or even a cinematographer or a production designer are going to see a location, what they can do to a location, and for me a huge part of handing that over to the production is photographing stuff well. So for me, photography is a really important skill. There are lots of location managers out there who can take half decent photos but don't put the time and effort into their photography that I do. But equally, they will be the ones who are very, very good at closing down central London and landing a helicopter in Trafalgar Square, which would scare the absolute hell out of me, and I try and avoid those jobs if I can. So there's a creative side, there's a logistics side, so my responsibility, as well as finding the locations, is also organising all the permits, all the parking, liaising with, if you were filming in Bridport, if we wanted to film out in the street here, it would be speaking to the town council, the county council, highways, all the residents, all the shop owners, and just sort of getting everyone on board. So you've got there's also sort of, that brings in a kind of diplomacy as well. So you have to be good with people, and particularly good with a very kind of wide range of people. So it's not at all unusual for me in a working day to deal with a bin man and a security guard, a multi-millionaire hedge fund manager, and an angry producer who's realised that they're going over budget because they're suddenly going to get into overtime because the hedge fund manager's playing music really loud out of his apartment and doesn't want to turn the music down. So it's a very strange mix of skills. The photography side is definitely for me my strongest. I do really enjoy the kind of diplomacy and kind of having to deal with lots of different people. The logistics I can do, and I can do a half decent job, but it's the bit that, given half a chance, I try to avoid and get someone else to do.
Is map reading important?
Yes, it is. I still get it. If you would go to my car now, in the side pockets of the doors and in the boot, there are a lot of pink Ordnance Survey maps, hard copy maps, and it has gone now because I don't really do London jobs if I can avoid it. But there was also a big A4 hardback A to Z of London, and lots of people. So often when I sort of, people like directors or if I'm doing a recce with someone, they'll get in my car and they're like, "How come you still got those maps? Do you not just use your phone?" And particularly with kind of rural and kind of countryside locations, I need to be able to open a map out and to see to understand how, if I see a remote cottage on a map, or you don't even know necessarily it's a cottage, you see a little tiny square on a map and you think that is probably a cottage on this bit of coast, and it looks like there's a road leading to it. But there's something about seeing a physical map. And again, even with the A to Z, regularly I'd go off and you'd be looking for residential streets. So someone would go, okay, we need a Victorian residential street, or we need a street of 1950s or 60s classic suburban houses. And you can tell by looking at the map, by the street names, by the layout of the actual shape of the roads, where those roads are in relation to other roads around them. You can go, I reckon chances are, so this was for this obviously pre-Street View, I would know by looking at the Ordnance Survey map where that 1960s street was. And it's still really useful for me to do that with a physical map rather than doing it online. It just helps my brain massively to do it physically.
So knowing what kind of architecture is what, and what the difference between a 1920s house and a 1970s house is obviously part of your skill set. Were you kind of naturally drawn to architecture, or did you study?
So when I left school, I took a year off and travelled, and then came back and I started a course at Manchester University to do structural engineering and architecture. And I loved being in Manchester, but I got home at the end of that first term, and I think like lots of students do in that kind of, that Christmas, suddenly start to question what they were doing. And I'm quite practically minded, and I do really love architecture, and I love buildings, but I realised that that just wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I went back, might possibly have picked up my grant cheque for the second term, and then stopped. And I, at the time, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I did think about potentially doing film studies, so I spoke to people at Manchester University about it. And I also, I thought my parents were going to go nuts when I said that I was pulling out of my course, but they were really supportive. And actually, when I mentioned film studies, my dad said, "Oh, there's someone who drinks in the pub who's something to do with film." And it turns out he ran a small film studio in Wandsworth that mainly did TV commercials for Fairy Liquid and Bold and really exciting stuff like that. But he was a really nice guy. And I went and had a chat with him, and he said, if you want to get into the film business, don't do film studies. He wasn't saying don't do it at all, but he was saying to get some experience. And he said, I can help you with that. If you really want to, if you're really interested, come and see me. I'll see if I can get you some work as a runner in the studio. Get some experience in the film business. And then if you do, there are, depending on, once you've decided on what aspect of the business you find interesting, perhaps it is useful to go and do film studies, but for a lot of jobs it's not. It's much better just to get some practical experience. So I completely ignored, well, I didn't ignore him. I kept his advice in the back of my head, but in the end I ended up going to do a geography degree at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. So I did that, spent 3 years there, but during my first term, maybe my second term, my dad went into the pub, and that same guy was sat in the pub looking really stressed because he had a big shoot the following day, and his runner, who worked in the studio, had some family issues and had told him that he couldn't make it in. So my dad said, "Oh, well, Eddy's at university and he seems to do bugger all most of the time. Maybe he can help." So he called me, and the next day I went down and did a day's work in this studio and just loved it. It was just a run. I was making tea and coffee. I didn't know what I was doing. I obviously knew how to make tea and coffee, but probably not very well. He, all the way through university, he just would offer me bits and pieces of work. So it meant I came out of university without a sort of massive debt, which was really nice, and I had quite a lot of experience with him. And as I left, he had a full-time in-house studio runner who had handed his notice in. So I just sort of walked straight into that job, and there's still people who I work with today I think I worked there for about 18 months, but there's still people I work with today who I met back then as a runner, and they may now be producers or directors, and back then would have been, maybe just a couple of rungs higher than I was. But those connections have really done me good over the years.
So you've been asked to find the Victorian street that you previously mentioned. When you've found your perfect Victorian street for, say, it is a period drama, there will be certain things you'll have to do, like get rid of the 21st century in that street. So there won't be yellow lines or parking meters or satellite dishes or cables or car chargers. What's your first move when you're at the street? Do you do the door knocking?
Slightly depends. So most, that is a really good example, sort of doing a period thing in a kind of a street in a city. So most, in London, all the individual London boroughs have their own film offices, and they are either run directly by the borough councils, or they are, there's one company now who run kind of on behalf of the councils who run the film offices. And they'll basically have a dedicated team who will have some sort of overview of how council departments work and what can and can't be done. So usually for me, they would be my first point of call, sometimes even before I've started scouting. So I might have an idea of where I want to go, and I would, and this is the same, so that happens in London. Once you get outside London, it tends to be more, so like Bristol has one that covers the whole of Bristol, same with Manchester, Cardiff. And then for example, in Dorset, there isn't an official film office. There is someone within the council who oversees filming at Dorset Council. So it's, that's an initial call. And then once, really just to sort of check with them, that, but particularly in London, some streets get filmed to death. And there will be areas of London that kind of eventually the councils will say, we just need to rest these streets for 3 months or 6 months just to give the residents or businesses a chance to kind of recover from the last film crew. So I do that. So that's, once I know that on the council side it's workable, it would then literally be going around, starting to knock on doors, finding out if there's a residents association, and then just talking to people. So finding out whether anyone's got any building work planned, starting to have a think about, if you are going to film there, where you're going to park all your trucks. So there's sort of that, on that logistical side, there's sort of two sides to it. You've got most shoots will have a unit base, so that will be where all the big trailers are for makeup and wardrobe and all that sort of stuff, where all the crew arrive at the beginning of the day, have their catering, park their cars. So that's down to me to find that. And then all the technical vehicles that have got all the equipment, it's also down to me to find a place for them to park as close as possible to the location. So I'm starting to do that as well. And then working with someone like Caroline. And
then you have someone like me come along and say, so the art department works super closely with locations. I like to have the location manager work out of my office if we have offices, which quite often we don't these days, so that I can overhear every little problem or little new fabulous find or new director's weird, request. So you found the house. I want to re-wallpaper it. It's an absolutely zhuzhy modern interior, and we're shooting some Victorian thing, or upstairs, downstairs, and so I will go to you first with some reference and maybe drawings or photographs, saying this house is perfect for lots. The staircase is in the right place, the skylight's right, we love the garden, but I hate what it looks like. Your job is to convince, to negotiate with the owners. How do you go about that?
I mean, again, that's back to that whole sort of thing of being quite diplomatic and having to get on with lots of people. As far as I remember, I've never sort of lied to anyone about what it's like to have a film crew in their house. Possibly might have done at the beginning, but I probably learnt my lesson quite early on. It doesn't work. It's like, sometimes especially if you've just door knocked a house, so you either, I used to just find a street and start knocking on doors. Now it tends to be that you'll pop a note through the door saying, explaining what's going on, putting a number on and saying, look, if you're interested, give me a call. But sometimes people will get that note or get that door knock and they go, oh, filming, oh, that's really exciting, oh, that's great. And you can spend so much time telling them that it sounds great, but there's going to be 60, 70, 80 people in your house with loads of big equipment, and we're going to be here at 7 o'clock in the morning, and chances are there's still going to be someone here at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And they're still excited, no matter how many times you tell them that it's not going to be exciting, and actually on the day the filming itself's probably going to be quite boring. I think the one comment that I get most when I'm on a shoot and you start talking to members of the public is, why are there so many people standing around doing nothing? And there is a reason for that. That whole thing of sort of getting people on board right at the beginning and getting locations to really understand is a key thing. And particularly when you get to that thing of having requests like that, I'm very cautious about how I do it. There is a real benefit to house. So if you have a house that is very slightly tired and needs redecorating, we're going to redecorate it how we want it. But at the end of it, we will also redecorate it back to how you want it. So not only are you getting paid for your house to be used, but actually you are getting it effectively redecorated for free. And then equally, there are a few locations. There's some locations in London that get used over and over again, and they've made a point of welcoming redecoration. And so you'll redecorate, and if they like that redecoration because it gives them a fresh look, they keep it. So it means that their location, which may have been used 10 times before with one particular look, suddenly it's got a new look, so it's opening up to a new group of people who might be interested in it.
And it's your department's job, I'm never envious of this, to protect the location. And there are all kinds of tricks and tips and pieces of gear that, even more these days, for making sure that we don't bash the house to bits. Could you chat about protecting the location in case you're shooting here soon? Yes,
exactly. Another part of my job is exactly that. So it is, there was about 15 years ago, we filmed in a very, very, very big period house in kind of Roehampton area that had literally just gone through I think a 10 or 12 million pound refurbishment. And they had literally finished pretty much the day before we went in. So this house was completely immaculate. So we went in, covered all the floors, like used to be with corrugated plastic like builders use, but now it tends to be kind of rubber-backed carpet mats, just because they can be reused. They're really good for sound. So if the crew are walking on them, you're not going to get sound that the sound pick up on. Covering door frames, just covering gardens. So there's a whole other level there. But actually, that kind of The thing about sound, when Caroline was asking about those things that you kind of think about when you first go to a location, there is a lot to think about. So it's not just the very obvious logistics of like, can I park 20 trucks close to this this very small kind of terraced street, but is also, is there going to be a sound issue? Are we in a flight path? Could there be any building work going on nearby? There's and then you've also got things like, usually at that early stage, I'll try and get a bit of an understanding as to how the shoot might work. So if I know right at the beginning that there's going to be a night scene, night scenes, although night scenes are dark, night scenes tend to involve a lot of lighting, and generally, especially if you've got night scenes, or particularly if you've got rain, you can't see rain at night unless you've got a very big light behind it. Even in daytime, an even bigger light, you can't, so all those things you start thinking about, and you kind of go, okay, if we're shooting in this street and we need to have rain, and we're shooting at night, where literally physically where can those lights go? And if there's not an obvious place for them to go on the ground, chances are they're then going to be on a cherry picker or a crane. So it's like, well, actually that crane's going to be quite big because it's going to need to get a very heavy light above the roof of a house. So is there a place around here where I can put that crane? And even more importantly, even if there's a place where I can put it, can it actually get there? Because there's no point kind of having a space for the crane if it can't go through the very narrow road restriction around the corner, or underneath the low bridge, or all these. So there's multiple things that you end up thinking about.
Yeah, you do have all those logistics. I'm always astounded by.
That's why I don't like the logistics jobs.
Yeah, just the stunning ones. Have you ever worked very close to home? Home being here?
I have, yes. So my after that very first initial kind of dream film job of shooting wherever you want in the world, and I would really highly recommend, actually, if anyone, the film that I worked, that film was a film called The Fall, which was produced or came out, and I think in 2006, and it didn't get a very wide release. I checked the other day, actually, and it on IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, it gets 7.8 out of 10 reviews, and lots of people saying this is one of the greatest films ever made that has just never been seen. It is, I definitely think it's a Marmite film, but it's as far as locations, cinematography, costumes go, it's quite extraordinary. Even more extraordinary when you realise that one man just put his hand in his pocket and paid for it all. But it's really worth watching. So anyway, so I sort of did that, then went back into the world of commercials. And when I moved down here, there was a location manager who I used to work with. When I was in London, there was quite a team of people who we worked with. And Emma, who used to be part of that, had sort of much more moved into doing film stuff. And she called me and she said, I've got a job in Dorset. We're potentially shooting in Lyme Regis and in and around Dorset. And so her job was, most of my jobs where I've worked on film or TV stuff is either as a location scout or a location manager. So as a scout, I'm literally just doing the scouting. So just finding the locations. And once I found them, I then hand them over. As a location manager, I would then effectively carry it through and do all the permits and be on the shoot. Above me would be a supervising location manager, so most films of any kind of size would have someone above me. I haven't done that role, and I don't really have any desire to do it. I'm quite happy doing kind of what I do. And so she was the supervising location manager, and she signed me up to this job. She said, look, we're shooting in London, we're shooting down in Dorset. So I started on that, and that was Ammonite, which was the film with Kate Winslet and Saoirse Ronan, which shot large chunk in Lyme Regis. And so I started, and about 3 days later, Emma called me, said, this is a bit weird, but I've just been sacked. So she she's quite a fiery character, and I just didn't get on with the director. I think they just so she but she said, but it's all right, you're still there. So anyway, so a new supervising location manager came on that I didn't know, and he kind of just left me to it, which was great. He was there if I needed him, but we knew we were going to film in Lyme Regis, obviously, because it was a kind of key part of the film. And the main, I don't know whether anyone actually went while it was being filmed, but the main set was at the sort of bottom of the hill at Lyme Regis, where there's the little car park with the funny little clock tower. But so we were in the little set of shops just above that. So there was an existing shop there, which was actually a fossil shop. So we converted that fossil shop into Mary Anning's house and shop, and effectively took over. It kind of worked really well because in some ways it worked really well. It's not on the main road, so it's separate. It's pedestrianised, and most of the buildings generally were kind of quite period accurate. But when you looked out to sea, you could see the street lamps, you could see the bus shelter below. All of the buildings actually, when you start looking at them, have got modern locks, they've got TV aerials, they've got burglar alarms, all these sort of things. So slowly we started piecing it together. The owner of the shop was up for it, but then to make it work, we had to have the owners of all the other shops also up for it, and the council up for it, which became quite a challenge on the council level. As you get to the bottom of those steps in Lyme, if you had 3 legs, this was back before Dorset Council was one council, but there was a place, if you stood with 3 legs, each of your legs would be in a different council. One was Lyme Regis Town Council, one was West Dorset District Council, and one was Dorset County Council. All of whom had different interests and levels of engagement with how we were shooting. So there was a lot of challenges there, and in the end we made it work. And also I think the hard thing with that was we had Kate Winslet and Saoirse Ronan, so everyone assumes that it's a big budget film, but it really wasn't. I think the budget on that film was just over £1 million, which for a film of that scale is very, very low. So we were having to be incredibly careful about how we spent the money, and as well as obviously dealing with all the obvious things that Caroline was sort of talking about, like covering stuff up and making stuff look period. You also have the issue that the sound of buses and cars in the background is not particularly period either. So to make that work, we had to get permission from Dorset Council to have intermittent traffic control. So effectively, while we were filming, we could stop traffic so that there weren't engines running in the background. So yeah, that was my introduction to filming locally, and it was really good. I think I went very above and beyond on that job because I really wanted to be sure that I could visit Lyme Regis in the future without being worried about being taken into a dark alley and beaten up. And I think I did okay. I think there was only one person who I had a bit of a falling out with, but I've since discovered lots of people have fallen out with the same person, so I don't feel so bad about that. But it was a great experience, and the other thing that was quite interesting is on that job we had quite an issue with paparazzi on that job. Obviously because of who was there, and we were in a public place. That's also down to me to help sort out. There's a publicist, so every shoot will have someone who deals with publicity. So they were able to give me some advice. And there was one particular photographer who was really persistent, and it turned out after a while we realised that there was possibly someone on our crew who was leaking information to this photographer, so they knew exactly where we were going, what we were doing. And there was one scene so we even had this, so we were filming on Charmouth Beach, and there was this guy right up on the cliffs, on the edge of the cliffs, which made me very nervous, with a very long lens shooting everything that we were doing. And there was one scene, and the director was very, very insistent that this scene should not come out before the film was released. And he said to me, he said, "Are there any private beaches around here?" And the only private beach, sort of in inverted commas private beach, is Charlton Beach at Roosden. And I'd spoken to them right at the very beginning of the job about potentially shooting there. And they said, "We're really sorry, but we just don't, because access is so difficult, we just don't allow filming on it. It's just a sort of health and safety thing." And, you know, it would seem totally fair enough. And when this issue came up, I suddenly thought, well, there is a way around the fact that access from the land is really difficult. You could come in by sea. So I spoke to the director about it. He loved the beach. You know, it's a stunningly beautiful beach because not that many people go there. But we had this problem that obviously we thought that someone was leaking information to the PAPs. So we hatched a plan. So basically, me, the producer, the director, and the first assistant director were the only people who knew that this was happening. So we basically arranged to shoot there, and on the morning of the shoot, everyone went to Charmouth. We filmed our scenes at Charmouth, and everyone had been told that there was a scene to be filmed in the afternoon, which was at a location. And no, actually, to be honest, no, I've got a feeling they just said we're at the end of the day that we may have some additional shots. So it was really kept very loose. So we finished at Charmouth. Everyone got in minibuses, went back to the big car park in Lyme Regis, and the four of us who knew, and the other 100 or so people who had no idea what was going on. Then, so basically, I'd gone round to Charlton Beach by land. The people who needed to, so we really stripped the crew down to an absolute minimum. They got put in minibuses, went down to the harbour in Lyme Regis, got in a load of ribs, and went round to Charlton Beach. I was the only person it's me and two security guards were on the beach. So, and I really remember that thing. It felt like some kind of SAS arrival on the beach, because you suddenly sort of round the headlands, all these people. And we shot on the beach, and it is a really beautiful scene in the film, so it's really worthwhile. But yeah, again, it's like one of those kind of weird things you think.
But you beat the paparazzi.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, it was good. It was definitely a one-up.
Before I get you all to ask the questions I know you're dying to ask, I have. Can you tell us about Pymore and Kate Winslet, please?
Yes. So. During Ammonite, the production offices for Ammonite ended up being in the little industrial park at Pymore, where Bridport used to be. I can't remember what they're called, and so to Bed are. And my friend John he had one of the buildings there, and he was working he had the ground floor, and he had the floors above were empty, so the production used that building as their base. And so this was just before we started shooting, and there's a scene in the film where Kate Winslet has to skin a rabbit. So Kate hasn't skinned many rabbits before, and so they got someone in who knew how to skin a rabbit to teach her how to do it. But obviously it didn't feel like the right thing to do inside this building, so they said we sort of need an outside space to do it. And it's like, well, we can't really do it outside because it's quite public, and again, what happens if someone comes along and takes a photo? So I said, I've got a friend who lives nearby in Pymore. Well, maybe we could use her garden. So I called my friend up and said, is it possible to use your garden tomorrow? She goes, yeah, of course it is. I didn't tell her at all what it was for. And so the following day, she had a ring on her doorbell, and this woman stood outside her doorbell with a kind of farmery looking guy, and there's a farmer and a woman in a beanie, and they say, we've come to use your garden. She goes, okay. So she lets them in, totally not blocking who this person is, and then that person takes their beanie off, and she realises that she's got Kate Winslet in her back garden skinning a rabbit.
The things that actors have to learn quite amazing, isn't it, for different roles. I am sure you have questions.
It has changed in lots of ways. So the technology has changed in a few things. When I first started, in fact, I brought these in. I had also brought this in. Everyone thinks that the film business is very, very glamorous, but I spend an awful lot of my time wearing one of these. So when I very first started, everything was shot on film, and so I'd go out, spend a day photographing locations, and at the end of the day would mount all my photos up on boards like this, showing exactly what it was like. So my technology has obviously helped, like the whole sort of digital camera thing has completely changed things. You know, what I can achieve in a day and how much I can share in a day has ramped up massively. But as far as kind of digital technology actually in the filming process, at the moment, we still need real locations, and I worked on Paddington in Peru, and on that, there was a location manager doing all the stuff in the UK. I just did the scouting in Colombia, so they ended up shooting in Colombia and Peru. And initially the plan was that some of the crew and cast would go out to Colombia and shoot out there. But as things kind of developed, it ended up being that effectively all the stuff that was shot in Colombia was just background plates for stuff that was shot here. And I found it really fascinating because it became really nerdy location scouting. I had to find locations that I knew would work on a particular lens or where we could get a particular length of track. So, it's like if we're travelling down a river, we need to be travelling at this speed and we need to cover this distance. So it has really changed things, but not necessarily in a bad way. I think on the actual scouting side, it just means, like everything, that we just cram much more into the time that we've got. So it's not necessarily making it any easier, it's just making it more hectic. Yes, when I was in London, I used to, there's quite a lot of location companies who were effectively location libraries, so I used to part own a couple of companies in London that did that. So initially we had an office full of literally hundreds of kilograms of boards like this, of physical boards, and people would come into our office and flick through them, a bit like going to the library. Then obviously that went digital, and there's now loads of websites that you can look at that will have, particularly for interiors, particularly for big industrial sites that might take you a while to get into. But when I first started, we'd spent ages scouting houses. It's very rare to actually go out and scout houses now unless you lead a house in a very particular street, because you just go online, type in, very kitsch 1970s house, and there'll be 30 different houses that will come up. So that's a kind of main starting point. Money. It's still generally cheaper to shoot on it kind of seems crazy because you think if you're filming in location, you're bringing all the trucks and all the facilities and everything, but generally depends on how long you're going to be there. So there's definitely a stage where if you're going to be in a location that's going to get used for multiple shoot days, there will be a stage where it tips over into being more cost effective to be in the studio. So Caroline probably know more, be in a better position to know exactly where that swap over is, but yeah, that's the main reason. I've usually got someone really lovely looking after me, which sort of makes me, it's really odd, often when I turn up to do foreign jobs, there can be an element of feeling a little bit fraudulent because I'm turning up to a country that I don't know, and working with someone who knows it incredibly well. I'm getting all the praise when we turn up with great locations, and I'm then leaving and they're having to deal with all the logistics and all the stuff that I don't want to do, and I'm gladly walking away from it and just going back to them. So yeah, there's someone with me. They found the job. So yesterday I came to a talk here with Suzanne Mackey, who's a producer, and it turns out, which I hadn't realised until yesterday, that she is the producer on the job that I was working on until this Thursday. So I've just come back from a job in Brazil, and Netflix are doing a series. The boys from Brazil, the kind of remake of the film that came out in the 70s, I think. So I've just been out, and in 2 weeks out there, we scouted locations. And I generally, when I come back from overseas jobs, I do feel like my value is high. On this one, I felt it was particularly high. So I feel like because I'd been very immersed in the whole creative process of that job, I was looking at locations in a very different way to how the local team would have looked at them. I just had a much deeper understanding of how the production was working, of what the director had in his head, of how they could. So in the end, there's one key location that we were looking for, which I think will be made up of 3 individual locations. But I knew that there was a possibility of making that work, which the local team, it would have come out eventually, but it would have taken them a lot longer than 2 weeks to get to. So they were there to look after me, and they were very lovely at doing it. Really hard to say. I think sometimes I always say that the most difficult word in a brief is "and." So if someone says, "I want a gold circular room," I can possibly find a gold circular room, and it needs to have a window that faces south. And it needs to be in Manchester, and that's when it becomes really tricky. So the trickiness is it's very rare not to be able to find somewhere, or to find somewhere that with someone like Caroline or with a really good team you can make into what you want. But I think the other thing that I always find really interesting, so many people sort of say, "Oh, what's the most amazing location you've ever been to? You know, who have you worked with?" And it's never about the location or the stars. It's, for me, and particularly with a location, the best jobs are always the ones where you've really been in a place for a long time and got completely kind of embedded in that community and got to know. There's a job which I did absolutely years ago. It was a TV commercial for MasterCard with a pink Cadillac, and we shot it and I still remember there's a street called Eustace Street in Bolton, and there's 2 parallel streets, flat-fronted red brick houses, and they go down a hill, and at the bottom of the hill they've got the kind of classic back alleyways where everyone keeps their bins, and at the bottom of the hill is a big mill, and there's on the street corner is a corner shop, and one of the houses had instead of having a front room, they had a fish and chip shop. So there was a fish and chip shop, and beyond that was their kitchen, their normal kitchen. And it was just an amazing place, and in order to make it work, so it was just 2 entire streets, we had to clear everything out of the street, all the cars, but the people there were just amazing. And I think I was probably up there only for a week or so, but by the time you left, you felt that you knew everyone, and everyone was really happy you were there. So those are always the jobs that really kind of end up being memorable. And I can see see it nodding.
Absolutely. No, couldn't agree more.
Exactly, that you don't. It's just there's so much with filming that you can't do. So if you on that side, it is literally just that thing of being polite. I think the way that that sort of for a publicist's job, so the people who are actually managing about how a film is released and perceived by the public, is much harder now, exactly because of that. But I think sometimes that they will plan and have a way to make that, to part of their kind of process. But if we're filming like for example, if you're filming in a street in London, short of completely closing the road and closing down, getting a formal road closure and closing down every business, you can't stop people. So you are generally saying, please, do you mind just holding on for 5 minutes while we do the take? And generally it works, but yeah, there's a lot of pleading with people.
I want to just steal your thunder for a second. I was shooting in Portobello Market with Emily Blunt and Bill Nye, and we did the exact opposite. We just shot it, and the crew was hidden in a market stall like a hide, and by the time they'd done about 3 takes, people started noticing that they were there. And then was the PA's jobs of getting everyone who was in the background's permission to be in the film. There were about 10 people getting that. So
yeah, I did a massive TV commercial in Terminal 5 at Heathrow, which was basically it was called Welcome Home. I think it was for T-Mobile, but it was a kind of flash mob type thing. So as people came out of departure, as people arrived, there was this extraordinary. They basically had a whole load of singers and musicians. They were singers who were sort of effectively beatboxing this track. So we had 18 hidden cameras in and around Terminal 5, all with, we put 7 kilometres of cable into Terminal 5, going outside to a broadcast truck. It was all done live. We had spotters all the way around, kind of going, there's some interesting people coming out. And that whole thing, that was done completely with hidden cameras. So, and someone had a really, really difficult job of then going around and basically saying to all the people who were in those, the director would go, that shot there, that's the one, I really want those people. And then you've got to find them, but they've just arrived and they want to get home. So, yeah. Not in my experience, not that often. I have sometimes used that as ways to sweeten people up, especially, like, we can get your kids in, or and actually even odd little things, like years ago I did a short film which we shot on a housing estate up in Rotherham, and there were some 13, 14-year-old kids who, the very first time we arrived, you just knew had trouble written all over them. And actually, this was me as at the time, I'd just started doing location work. The director, to her credit, who was about Caroline's height, very quietly spoken, she just went straight up to them and started talking to them. And she basically said, she said, look, we are going to be here, and we don't. I'd love to be able to say to you that you can be in it, but you can't. But do you want to get involved? And actually, in the end, we slightly tongue-in-cheek made them our security. So we basically just said, look, can you guys help stop all the other little ragamuffins come on set? And we gave them a little room where they hung out, and they had a monitor so they could watch what was going on, and it worked really well. So again, that was a good lesson for me in those early days of like diplomacy and how you make things work. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, on that diplomatic last note, please say thank you to Eddy for